process here.
You got it. Well, yeah, he's doing the intro.
Okay, now.
Hello, my name is Ron Bettag. I'd like to welcome you to the Houston LaRouche discussion for August the 17th. I'll give a couple of preliminary remarks, and then we'll have the prime discussion today led by Kesha Rogers on how and why we commit ourselves to the Moon-Mars mission. And this is obviously on the table now with President Trump adopting this. And we have a number of nations in the world, especially the four major powers, Russia, China, India, in parallel with the United States, already moving in the same direction. So if we think back a little bit, and just in terms of how we, as an organization in the LaRouche movement, got here, Lyndon LaRouche actually faced the reality coming out of World War II that the causes and the networks that created that World War and earlier ones, and this is this oligarchical operation, the British Empire, the Anglo-Dutch Empire, to look at it a little bit bigger, that has consistently been part of an oligarchical operation that has run societies historically by playing them against each other. And realizing that, and the insight and the courage, took up the task and actually began creating on campuses and in other areas what became known as the International Caucus of Labor Committees, a network of individuals who were involved in discussions and insights and beginning to create a policy capability to correct that. Because what Mr. LaRouche saw at that time is these very same forces committed to the same economic and political policies would lead to a similar kind of collapse in the future. So Mr. LaRouche always had the perspective of a conjunctural perspective. How do you create the situations and the networks in which at that point of crisis we would be in a situation to shift it all in terms of a new paradigm. And Mr. LaRouche led that fight until his death earlier this year in February. And the organizations continue that fight. And if you've been on the sites or reading the material or getting the leaflets in the streets, you see from that first kind of insight through the course of those decades of deployment, we, through his direction and all of us individually in the networks we've moved, we've created a political, economic, and psychological and cultural intervention that presently is the core of what's defining one faction of this paradigm internationally. And that presently has the active engagement of the government of China and their whole land bridge policy, the Belt and Road. We have the Russians now, in the name of Vladimir Putin, actually openly adopting and laying the basis culturally and scientifically why we need to move to a fully committed global coordinated development of thermonuclear fusion, which is an early fight led in detail by Mr. LaRouche. You also have India and literally 100 and more, 120, 140 other nations involved in these kinds of policies and discussions and interventions on the core inside of Mr. LaRouche, that you have to basically end this bankrupt system, this derivative system, and be in a position to credit for development. And in the course of the last week, in attempting to refine that and expand it, because one thing that Mr. LaRouche always laid out is that to understand history, you have to be an active part of history. Which is what the organization and the whole committees of correspondence now and everything we've talked about, the Thursday night calls, the EIR, it's all directed to this. How do we bring more and more individuals into that, that active fight? And in the course of the discussions this week and the organizing, one of the things that was identified is that most people have a passive or at least a static relationship to this particular issue or that particular issue. They're for this or they're against that. And in all those situations, no matter what the particulars are, the ability to solve the problem doesn't exist, because we're presently in a situation exactly like defined by LaRouche decades ago, where that financial crash is again blowing out. We have to still freeze that amount of derivative paper, and we have to have this directed credit creating a condition for development. So the various approaches to anything less than that simply will not work. We've got to pull people into this higher fight. So the question of being actively involved in politics in terms of a deployment of a policy is what we want to discuss today. And the change in identity and the change in the culture of society that reinforces that. And so the interventions we've been doing, like this past 2 days ago at the New Hampshire Trump rally, in which we had 5 people getting out thousands of pieces of literature affecting that building, a meeting following that. Across the country, we've been educating his base, doing the same kind of things on campuses and things. So it's this kind of deployment that we want to bring more and more people in on. And we have 2 specific projects right now that people can do online or take some with them today. One is the petition to exonerate Mr. LaRouche, which actually brings all these questions from the economy to the politics to the scientific drivers directly to the forefront, because this is also what's going after President Trump. And then secondly, the petition to actually personally sign on and commit ourselves to the Moon Mars project, where you get this out, you use your own activities to build the base where this is actually becomes the policy. And what we're going to discuss today is exactly that the manner in which we can create a shift in the culture, in the scientific drivers, the application of that, the credit policy to do that, the overall political structures that people can join and see and determine what the policy of the present administration presently is, and what the next one has to be as we build over the next 25, 50 years. We've got to define this policy as LaRouche has laid it out now. So what I'd like to do in terms of pointing out this pamphlet, this is exactly what Kesha is going to walk us through today in terms of not only the Artemis project itself, but also, like the Apollo program, the spin-offs and the applications that will take place in the American and the global economy itself. So before we go into that, I'd like to show one short piece. This is a 2-minute spot from our intervention. Daniel Burke, who's running for Senate up in New Jersey, sent this. It's a kind of a 2-minute overview of and description of the discussion that took place in the Trump rally and the kind of educational perspective we have off of this. So Mike, you want to play that real quickly? Okay.
Hi, this is Daniel Burke with the LaRouche Political Action Committee. I'm here at President Trump's Manchester, New Hampshire presidential campaign rally. And I'm here with a team of LaRouche PAC activists, and we are campaigning. We're fighting to educate people. We're fighting to give them a sense of the future, of what the next 40 years require from us. So there's tens of thousands of his supporters. There's a small handful of protesters. And in the midst of this, you have a desire to do what's necessary, but a grasping about for the next policy needed. So as we're going up and down the lines talking to people, there's enormous excitement about the space program, and there's not much knowledge about fusion energy. There's not a concept about the change that's needed in the world economy to prevent this financial crash from happening. But people know LaRouche, and we're coming to them with something that they're not expecting, which is that the U.S.-China relationship is exceedingly important to the success of President Trump's mission as a president, that it's not socialism, it's not China that's the enemy, it's the British Empire that's committed to mass genocide. And I can say that what people do get is that we can change the culture like President Trump has been calling for since the El Paso and Dayton shootings. We can change the culture if we give people hope. And that's what the space mission will do. So I want to ask of you to join our movement. Get out here with us. It's a lot of fun. We have new people coming out with us all the time now. And join us in getting signatures on this petition to commit to the Moon-Mars mission, which lays out the full LaRouche program for the next 50 years. Get on board with that, and I'm sure that we can win, that we can take the people who are optimistic and defiant out here and give them direction. Please support that effort in whatever way you can, including making large financial contributions to make sure that we can get our volunteers out here. I drove 4 hours to get here. Bye-bye.
So this all takes place in a context where the enemy also has an active view in their role in intervening in history. So exactly as you get this kind of excitement building in the population, like we saw around the 4th of July, like we see with the anniversary of the 50-year landing, you have an immediate deployment by the British and their networks, whether you look at the Russia situation continuing, the attacks on Trump, the situation in Hong Kong, where you have literally American forces, or at least people in American garb and guise, waving the American flag, singing the American Star-Spangled Banner. You have Hillary and others saying we've got to defend this. All these deployments in public to do what? To create a situation where you provoke the Chinese to move in some kind of defense, or you provoke a situation where you get then a bloody shirt, and the United States then reacts as they're pressuring Trump to do already. So you get a situation where one of these created situations breaks out of control. All these colored revolution operations, which both the Russians through Putin and also Xi Jinping have identified as acts of war. So you have this question of what is wrong with the way Americans think in terms of whether or not we're going to move at this time in time as we have not done in the past. And what's so exciting about the young people is they come at this in many ways as disillusioned and manipulated as anyone, but unlike some of the older people who have a similar kind of fear to act, or have a kind of a stupidity about them in terms of this singular linear kind of notion, in the youth you have at least the generation at the age level when they're interested and identified in throwing off the infantile. So we're finding situations where you meet a person thinking this and this and this, and then right in front of your face they shift 180 degrees. And it's a similar kind of young kind of courage also that, as we've demonstrated, as LaRouche has demonstrated youth movements in the past. So we're in an excellent situation to use our forces and expand this and move quickly. So the journal will be discussing is this commitment to the Moon-Mars project, and I'll ask Kesha to come up and actually address that and have questions there.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Ron. So, a second here. I think the theme for today, and really what is absolutely important for us to get across to the population, is that the world needs more people. And you asked, why do we need more people? With all of the destabilization and all of the chaos going on, and the poverty, why do we need more people? We need more people because we have to actually advance the true identity of mankind, of what makes human beings different from the animal. And a lot of the people in this room, people who have been long-term associates with the greatest genius and economist, Lyndon LaRouche, in the world, has seen that the effects of LaRouche's ideas have been powerful all over the world. We're continuing to see that. And when we go out into the streets, as Ron was saying, And I just want to reiterate the response that we got on this question of what our commitment of the LaRouche organization is to, and why it's so important, why the exoneration of LaRouche at this point in time could free the whole of mankind. And that's what we're out to do. Because when people meet us, what we're experiencing is not people who are wedded to party politics. We're experiencing people who are saying, we want a future. We want to free our children from the grips of cultural despair, from being destroyed by the culture of violence, of violent video games, of a no future generation. Now we're out in the streets, and what we're seeing on a daily basis is what's happening to the destruction of these young people, where you have little 13 or 14-year-olds saying, I want to be Greta Thunberg. I want to be like the little 16-year-old girl that they're prancing around to tell young people that their lives are meaningless, that they don't have a future, or that everybody who is not out to destroy the industrial society is a bad human being. And this is what they're doing, where you have young 13 or 14-year-olds coming up to our tables and holding up their signs, you know, anti-Trump, or talking about why climate change has to erupt the fight for climate change and ending human progress, scientific progress has to erupt across the planet. Well, we're out to destroy that, because we're out to save our children. And this is what, you know, as someone who has been organizing with Lyndon LaRouche's movement, and as a young person, you know, coming out of college, seeing what was happening to the younger generation, seeing what would happen after the devastation and the horror of 9/11, and particularly a lot of us younger people can admit to our own involvement in the corruption of the culture, and how it was the LaRouche organization, with the dedication toward a cultural transformation and identifying the purpose and meaning of human life, that we decided to get politically active. Not because we wanted to be, I can say for myself, you know, not because you wanted to get into politics so you can show off and, you know, get in to fit in and who do you know, but because we saw that the devastation of the culture was destroying our young people. And right now, this is what we have to do to intervene in the most important time of our lives, where when you have groups being formed like Extinction Rebellion or Deep Green Resistance, people who say that human beings, human civilization is bad, too many people on the planet, we have to destroy industries. The grouping called, and you should look these people up. I mean, this is who we're going to be bringing in to the UN General Assembly with this young 16-year-old demon girl that they have prancing around speaking to all Greta, who is the voice of the environmentalist movement. But the thing is that she's being used just like a lot of other these people, such as AOC and other people, because they're being used by the financial oligarchs who think they can keep their bankrupt system afloat. The problem is that the big multi-billionaires who are using people to destroy a real human progress, scientific industrial development, what they think that they can do with, you know, keeping this climate bubble going to bail themselves out is not going to work. Because one thing that LaRouche has understood and has very much been at the foundation of exemplifying is that a real economy based on physical production is really based on the creative powers of the human mind, of the advancement of industrial and true economic progress, advancement of a crash science driver program that is going to say we need more people because we actually have to build up a society of productive individuals, not because we want to keep people in poverty, or that we want to just bring more people on the planet to be isolated individuals, but because we need these people to advance mankind's presence throughout the solar system, throughout the universe. And so, am I working this, Mike, on my
No,
slide?
I can.
Okay, I want you to do the first one there. So the president asked a question and made a statement following the horrific shootings and attacks that took place. And he talked about, after the shootings in El Paso, where, what has really been defined behind this operation is that you've had an expression to escalate this anti-human, eco-fascist environmentalism, which at the heart of it is racism, is a policy to wipe out human civilization and say that some people deserve to live and some people don't deserve to live. That the individual who pulled that trigger, yes, the president is talking about, he said this in his last two rallies, that you have mentally deranged and insane people. And how do we actually accept a culture?
And some of them write for major newspapers.
And some, yeah, some of them write for major newspaper. Yeah, exactly. And how do you actually have a society that accepts this? That would actually, this is not just about a person having a gun and pulling the trigger, but what's going on in the minds of these individuals, where the movies they're watching, the culture they're living in, is actually producing a society of mass killers. So the president asked the question and posed the statement. It's not about taking the guns away or any of this. It's about a cultural transformation and cultural change. As he states here, cultural change is hard, but each of us can choose to build a culture that celebrates the inherent worth and dignity of human life. That has been the commitment of our organization throughout the entire planet. That we are committed to the advancement of the true dignity of mankind into human life. And what I want to do is, because a number of people really have not been infected and have not been truly transformed by the life commitment of the greatest genius and individual who has fought against those who have put out the idea that human beings are nothing more than animals. This has been LaRouche's life commitment, that human beings defined by the principles of the Judeo-Christian principles of Genesis 1 are created in the image of the Creator, is our mission as is defined in the Genesis of the biblical principle, and also universal to mankind. It is our obligation and role to go out and to actually multiply, subdue, and transform the earth, but also the solar system. And we're going to get into that in a minute. But the key to that is what we have done with this we commit to the Moon Mars mission, because the president actually has right at his fingertip the solution to the question that he poses here: how do we actually create the cultural change? And what we've done with the LaRouche organization, not just in this pamphlet, but our dedication in this movement, has been to answer that question. And the key is we answer it directly here, not just by saying we commit to the Moon Mars mission, but also by saying the true spark for changing the culture is this very mission. So that's how we're going to answer the president's question. And the commitment to the Moon Mars mission it's not just something that just came along as a slogan, but this has been the foundation of the ideas and the principles of Lyndon LaRouche in terms of creating the economic progress of society. To a Moon Mars mission is going to unleash not just the ability to send people to the moon and send them on to Mars, but that you actually have to have a science driver crash program that's going to advance the highest levels of technological scientific progress. And we'll get into this more in a minute, but I wanted to actually have and allow for Mr. LaRouche to define the principle of a Moon Mars progress and the industrialization of society, how this transformed the thinking of the existence of mankind, who we are as a human species, and what it represents for the future. So I'm going to play some of this, so I think you will be very much inspired by how Mr. LaRouche views the importance of a Moon Mars program. So let's listen to some of this.
But we have to do something else. We have to mobilize the population and its imagination. Because only the desire for a better future, only goals for a better future, can mobilize a population to be motivated to do what has to be done. We have, just when you put this Mars question, we have to industrialize the moon, which is already a project that's understood. 10 nations are actually concerned with the idea of industrializing the moon. 10 nations that are moon landing oriented. We have to take the moon and make the moon a baseline for things going into space. In other words, you don't want to build up tremendous weight and apparatus on Earth and have to pump that stuff up to the moon. What you do is you take your technology to the moon, and then you find the raw materials on the moon, which you use to build the craft. Now you'll build the craft which will actually take you, or take whatever you want to send, to Mars, that direction. So you have to build an industrialization of the moon. Remember, this is not a new idea. The space pioneers, as early as the immediate post-war period, the 1950s, the United States were already talking about that, as they were in the Soviet Union and in elsewhere. The Mars objective was the objective, the planet Mars. Getting there is going to be complicated. It's going to take a lot of science, a lot of development, but that's our mission. We're thinking ahead. We're not thinking about what we're going to get tomorrow. We're thinking about what our people are going to have 2 or 3 generations ahead. And we're thinking about the purpose in life which we're giving to young people today who are coming out of adolescence, the purpose in life for them. When they ask themselves, to what purpose am I living? Am I living to my satisfaction? Am I an animal? Or am I living for the sake of my coming generations? Am I living for the joy of my old age? Am I living to do the things that will give me joy in my old age? They will take a grandfather will tell his grandson, I helped build that, and here's what you're going to do in your time. It's that force of imagination. When that becomes the policy of nations, to develop the imagination in this way, the scientific imagination, the cultural imagination, where do we want to go? What do we want to promise to our grandchildren and their grandchildren? What do we expect as goals that we think we can realize in this term of life? How do we have to educate our people? What do we have to do now to give a meaning to life? Not the sense, are we animals? Do we just eat and have pleasure from one moment to the other? Or are we people who are thinking about humanity, about future generations, are thinking about what we owe to past generations and what we owe to future generations? Do our lives have meaning? Do they have purpose? Or are we just simply silly pleasure seekers or something, entertainment seekers? And the problem we have today is a cultural problem, which is a moral problem, is that under a zero growth society, a zero technological growth society, a greeny society, mankind becomes less than an animal in moral value, where the population requirements that we must anticipate right now is a world level of population of 7 billion. We have to anticipate that now, in this coming generation. And we have to prepare to be able to meet that challenge. And we can. The point is that you make people creative, you inspire them to be creative, inspire them to see objectives beyond what their habits today, and they will be creative, and they will create the ability to satisfy these goals. And mankind is not going to stick around as being just in the nook of this earth, just some corner of the solar system. Mankind is going out into the universe. If we can have a constantly accelerated flight within our galaxy, men in their own lifetime can explore some distant parts of this galaxy. We can do it. So that our perspective, we're not going to do this tomorrow, but our perspective has to be in that direction. It's what we have to tell to our children and our grandchildren. This is what we must do. And when you capture the imagination of people in a realistic way, this way, then they become moral, because they become inspired to do good. So therefore, we don't want this nonsense anymore. What we need is high energy flux density power, and the high energy flux density is the measurement of effectiveness of production. The higher the energy flux density, and this means you go from incident sunlight, you go up the scale toward nuclear power, and then to thermonuclear power, and beyond that. So the higher the level, for example, if you wanted to take a ship, and you wanted the ship to take you from Earth orbit, that is from the moon, to Mars orbit, with people in it. If you wanted to have that ship travel at a speed which gives you a gravitational effect for the inhabitants of the capsule, you will have a tank attached to you as big as the moon, just to contain the fuel. It's not a very good idea. So therefore, what you need a much higher energy flux density thing. You need fusion thrust. And where do you get the fusion thrust? Well, you go to the moon. That's your filling station. You'll find at the filling station on the moon, there's helium-3, an isotope of helium. Helium-3 is the best fuel for thermonuclear fusion. It's the most efficient. So if you wanted to have a ship with the one gravity effect on the passengers or the crew, between Earth orbit and Mars orbit, you would want to have thermonuclear fusion as your propellant. And it would come from helium-3 picked up from the gas station on the moon. And most of the equipment you would fly in would also be built on the moon from raw materials which are present on the moon. And once we get into that racket, we find that we're not limited to the moon. Once we become gatherers of raw materials and so forth in various parts of the solar system, then we find that we have many more kinds of resources to deal with. So in general, the point is we have to go to this kind of development. Therefore, we want a space orientation. We want a power space orientation combined to complement the development of a railway system. Now, in this process, when you start to build the railway system of the type we're talking about, you're going to have to recreate the machine tool production and so forth that you need. So essentially, in my view, in the United States, what we would do by tradition, we would take a large-scale project like the Tennessee Valley program, or our developing of our railway system, a transcontinental railway system. We would take that project and you would assign federal responsibility for creating the credit and authorizing this to build this system. You would then go to private contractors along the way who would pick up on filling out as subcontractors these projects, which is the way things always worked in the United States, where they worked. And thus, you take a driver, some scientific project, like a space program, a railway program, a water program, building power plants. These things now become the stimulus which spin off the subcontracts and opportunities for expanding industry again. So now we want to increase the productive powers of labor per capita per square kilometer. We take the large projects as drivers. We take the offshoots of the large projects, which are largely national projects, as stimulants for the smaller level, for people who do the things that are necessary to support the larger project out there. Now you expand, raise the level with aid of education, which is stimulated by this, to increase the productive powers of labor per capita in physical terms. And that's what we used to do in our best time. That's what we did under Roosevelt with a lot of improvisation. Do it again. That's the solution for Asia as well. You have to have the process of self-development of a population through the kinds of goals and stimulants which will enable that to occur in a lawful way. And you have to have a people-caring orientation to say, when you've got little kids out there, young people, who have no future, who are extremely poor with no significant prospect of getting a better life. This is the way you approach that problem. You transform people who have no future, and you give them a future by creating this process where they are assimilated into the process of the general growth of the society.
Amen.
Thank you. So
What's the date of that?
that is on
December 3rd, 2009.
2009, December 3rd. So we definitely needed those words at that period of time, 2009, because we know where we were.
Recession.
And who the president was. So I want to go through this a little bit more in terms of why this commitment as a science driver program to unleash the creative potential of every single citizen and human being in the way that Mr. LaRouche was just discussing. Because the one thing that we're seeing is that for the first time in almost 50 years, as Ron brought up earlier, we just celebrated the anniversary of the first human beings landing on the moon, July 20th, 1969. And you also have, in a contrast to that, what happened with the takedown of this optimistic drive and potential for advancing human progress, advancing the optimism of mankind, exploring the universe, exploring the solar system, which is the destiny of mankind, and also advancing our productive capabilities as a society. That what we've seen in contrast to the vision, the commitment of great pioneers and visionaries such as Lyndon LaRouche, of German space pioneers like Kraft Derricke, who have been, Kraft Derricke was one of the German space pioneers, engineers who actually came over to the United States with the leading rocket scientists. And one of the things that these individuals, and including the President of the United States, who really laid out the vision for the space program in the 1960s, which was President John F. Kennedy, they understood what they were up against in terms of the cultural decline and the targeting of people who really tried to say that space and giving the population the access to such powerful and optimistic ideas was a bad thing. Because if you start telling people about the space program and what they can do to actually end poverty and to change their lives and be more productive, then you're going to have every woman, child, and dog, and so forth who wants to be an engineer. And their objective was to crush that optimism. And so what we have right now, what we're dealing with, is that we're in a fight for the souls of mankind and civilization. that this isn't just a political fight. This isn't just Democrats versus Republicans. What we're seeing right now is a cultural warfare. And the cultural warfare is, are we going to actually survive as a human species? Will mankind be able to live on for generations, for millennia to come? Or will we be wiped out like every other species that has existed on the planet? And the way that we're going to prevent that is that we actually have to advance mankind's extraterrestrial imperative. We have to advance our understanding of man in the universe. And so this is what this entire pamphlet is about. First of all, the most important thing is that after almost 50 years of cultural decay and the move away from the mission toward space colonization, for the first time you actually have a president who's recommitted to the excitement of space exploration. But the key thing to that is there's one thing about excitement and there's one thing about understanding the importance of this as transforming the culture of mankind. And what we've seen, and the president really needs the ideas and the power of our movement out on the streets. And more people are starting to understand that as we're out there with our signs for Project Artemis. The president made an announcement back in December of 2017 that we're going to commit for the first time of sending human beings back to the moon and into space since 1972, which was the last time that American astronauts set foot on the moon. But there are very technical and scientific requirements as to how you're going to get that done. And we very much lay them out here because the scientific requirements is that, as Mr. LaRouche expressed, the space program has to be the greatest economic and scientific driver for mankind. And it's not just for one nation, and that's really being understood by those who are participating in the program that has been unleashed by the president. That the new space program, which is called the Artemis program, is what is going to be essential in destroying this anti-growth, this anti-human process. And before I go into actually giving a sketch of what the new program looks like and how we're going to accomplish it, I have a slide up there, Mike, about the no limits to growth, okay? Because this isn't anything new. This has been at the forefront of the fight that the LaRouche organization, Mr. LaRouche and his wife, Helga Zepp LaRouche, and members of our organization have been engaged in going against the British oligarchy, the imperial system's commitment to the idea that there's too many people, that growth is bad, that we have limited resources on the planet. And in the 70s, there was an organization that was found called the Club of Rome, and it was basically to push this idea, which the founder of it, this guy Dennis Meadows, is still actively involved, one of the founders, in pushing the new Extinction Rebellion, these young people to join in the organization and the idea that they have to help us decrease scientific and technological progress, that we have to rely on limited resources on the planet. So as a counter to this, the foundation of the organization found it that we had people from all over the world getting involved in, this was way before my time, but very much relevant for today, which is the Club of Life, founded by Helga and Lyndon LaRouche. And the counter to the Limits to Growth operation by the World Wildlife Fund, Prince Philip, the Club of Rome operations, Mr. LaRouche's fight around the idea that there are no limits to growth, as he just expressed in the video. And as this statement of the principle, one of the leading principles, and how the organization of the Club of Life was organized and founded, is very important to the continued fight for advancing mankind in the solar system. As she says, you know, the idea of the Club of Life caught fire because many people in many countries found it unbearable to see the constant spread of cultural pessimism, and considered it an urgent necessity to create a new institution based on human reason, on scientific and technological progress, as well as cultural optimism. That's what we're talking about today. That's what we are unleashing. We are out to spread cultural optimism like wildfire, you know, to make this really the mission of every single person, that the future of mankind is that we must rid of the idea that there are limitations to growth, that we're confined by one small planet, and not realizing that our planet exists in an entire solar system, in an entire universe, which is ours for developing, for the taking. So the conception, again, of the Moon Mars mission, let me just go ahead. I want to, you know, go through, I mean, first of all, what the outline of the program that has been laid out by the president. So you guys can cut it on. Yeah, leave that for me. Because in order to understand how we're going to rid of this idea of a closed world system, the idea that we're fixed and confined to one small planet, you know, the greatest genius, I just mentioned his name a second ago, who later in life became a collaborator of Lyndon LaRouche and Helga and our movement, had a very much a similar understanding to the idea of LaRouche, that we had to take on at the highest levels this environmentalist, anti-human, anti-growth agenda, and to actually give people a sense that the way that human progress is going to explode is through a science-driven space mission orientation. And I don't know if you have this next Kraft Erica steps to industrializing the moon. Okay, good. Because so before I go to giving a sense of the platform that's laid out by the president and is now being taken up by NASA for sending the next human beings to the moon, it is important to understand that there has been a 50-year space industrialization perspective that was laid out by Lyndon LaRouche, and particularly it was laid out by the visionary space pioneer Kraft Erica, on what would be the process by which you would start to look at the importance of industrializing and developing the resources on the moon. And he lays out in a paper, this is Kraft Erica, lays out in a paper called Lunar Settlements and Industrialization of the Moon, 5 steps that must be considered for lunar industrialization. And I'll just read it, you can see them here, and then you can compare how that defines where we must go with the achievement of the mission at hand. These 5 steps, he says, first, we examine the moon from Earth. Second, we examine the moon from lunar orbit. Consider the optimal site for an industrial base. and establish automated laboratories and pilot facilities on the surface. Third, we locate the best spot on the moon for an initial industrial base and establish it there. And fourth, he says, from this base we establish a larger industrial zone that can return resources to Earth while expanding across the moon. And fifthly, we expand and diversify from this initial base to create a translunar spacefaring civilization. And the picture there is a schematic or artistic drawing and representation of Kraft Erika's idea of what he called the city of Stellanopolis, a spacefaring civilization on the moon, how it would work, and its organized structure. And Lyndon LaRouche, in collaborating with Kraft Erika and also advancing his own ideas and being one of the greatest physical economists, talked about this from the standpoint, and some of us, I would encourage people to read this, actually just read a paper written by Mr. LaRouche on building cities on Mars and the development of how you're not just going to go to Mars and plant the stars and stripes there. The president has a very important commitment to that we have to get to Mars. But we're going to talk about in a second, if we're serious about getting to Mars, the steps toward the industrialization of the moon and also the advancement in the highest levels of energy density are going to be key. Because, as said, if you take the current chemical rockets and systems that we have in place right now, and you try to go to Mars with them, well, honestly, you might end up with having to have a robot go put the flag on the moon because the human being might just be a blob, because it would take them almost 2 years to get there. So as far as having life and working there, and this is something that's a big fight within the scientific community, because people want to stick with the old ways. And the idea that you're going to build just a spacecraft that would make comfortable for people to be able to travel in space and travel to Mars, and we can allow them to survive 2 years and going one way and maybe 2 years coming back. That's just one way. How much time did we waste when we can develop the technologies to get them up there faster and to actually start to develop the area? So we'll talk about that more in a moment. Why don't we go ahead and turn the light on? Okay, so again, I want to go through. I had a chance to actually help to contribute to some of this pamphlet here, and just was kind of working through the program of the Artemis program. And let me just define that and describe it for a minute here, because when the president said that we're going to send human beings back to the moon, it was a few years later, there was a program defined that we're going to escalate and get this done as a crash program, if you will, which needs to be filled out more, and that's what the LaRouche organization is doing, to send the first woman and the next man, first female, and actually first female will probably be the one to set foot out on the surface of the moon first, so that means she may be the commander of the command module pilot, the lunar commander. So, but this is great. This is a beautiful idea. It's getting a lot of people excited. The idea that we're going to actually send the first man and next woman to the moon by 2024. Now, in order to do that, there's certain parameters that have to be laid out for us to accomplish that, because one, you just can't, send somebody to the moon. You actually have to develop the industrial capabilities, develop the rocket systems and so forth to do that. So that's what we're doing. Let's go to phase 1. So the Artemis program here, which this mission is named after the sister,
Mike?
the twin sister of Apollo, which was the namesake for the first moon landing missions that we had, Apollo. Now we have the twin sister, the goddess of the moon, which is Artemis. And so this is just a schematic to show you, and you can read more on this, but the phases of the Artemis missions will start with first Artemis 1 will send the first human spacecraft, or actually unmanned spacecraft, uncrewed spacecraft will be Artemis 1, coming up very soon in 2020. And this mission is going to actually take the Orion spacecraft launched on top of the SLS rocket, and also will be driven by the European Space Module. And the European Space Module, this goes to show some of the international cooperation we have, is various space agencies throughout Europe, throughout the European Space Agency, that is organizing the system which will propel the Orion spacecraft, that will give the spacecraft what it needs in terms of propulsion systems, and supply the water and supply the resources for the spacecraft. And this is going to actually propel the Orion spacecraft further than we've ever been out into past the moon, and it's going to actually go into a high orbit around the moon. So that's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing we're going to do prior to sending the first humans is we're going to actually what we're going to do is we're on the Artemis 2 program, which you can see here. Okay, here we go. The second phase of the program is going to be to send human beings around the moon to do a lunar orbit, and this will be to test the Orion spacecraft, and to actually go and organize, similar to what we did during the Apollo 8 mission, where for the first time you had human beings going around lunar orbit. They're going to take a little bit of a different trajectory though. They're going to go a little bit higher up. And what you'll be having developed, and what will happen after they make this first mission to test the capabilities, to test all of the equipment on the spacecraft of the ESM, the European Space Module, and also the Orion, making sure those systems work. First human flight, they're going to come back and land in the Pacific Ocean. We're also as that is happening, going to have commercial companies and other companies working with NASA that are going to be putting up the components, and they're already starting to do that, to put up the components of what's called the Gateway module. So the Gateway is going to be a space center. That's a wrong word for it, but Gateway is actually going to be a location above the surface of the moon where the Orion spacecraft with the astronauts will be able to dock. It's a smaller version of the space station, except for the fact that this isn't going to have people there year round. This will be a location where the astronauts can go. They'll have a habitat there. They'll have propulsion systems. They'll be able to eventually use that to descend and ascend from onto the surface of the moon. And so we're already putting up this is being worked out through Lockheed Martin and other companies that are working together on developing the propulsion systems for the gateway to prepare the way for human beings to be able to easily launch onto the surface of the moon from the gateway. And it's also going to be a place where I went to an event just recently, and they were making the point, the gateway is going to be a place where other countries will be able to go at some point and to dock with the gateway system, and then to start to prepare the way for getting onto the moon. And finally, what you're going to have is that you will have the so these are by 2022, 2023 is when you're going to have all of the deliveries of the gateway system, preparing the way for a lunar landing. And also, as the gateway system above the moon is being prepared, you're also going to have companies that are already starting to develop lunar landers and orbiters, unmanned, that would start to robotics pave the way for investigating land area on the moon, where we want to land, what's going on in that area, commercial payload systems, where we're going to be putting, looking for capabilities for mining on the moon, so forth. And then finally, you're going to have 4 crew members going on the spacecraft to the Gateway orbiter, and you'll have two crew members, 2 astronauts, who are going to actually in 2024 land on the surface of the moon. Let's go to the next one. And this gives you more, the second phase, building the capabilities for a Mars mission. The second phase of this mission actually organizes once you get to the moon. As said, we have Artemis 4, the 5, 6, 7. So Artemis 3 is going to have the first human beings, the first female, next male to land on the moon. But we're not going to stop there. The key to it is those individuals will be coming back to Earth. They're going to bring back resources and materials they found on Earth. But you're also going to start to, you're not just gonna, it's not just a one-way trip, let's go to the moon, let's say we've been there, send the first woman, but we want to start to develop a permanent sustainable presence on the moon. And you're going to have more robotic systems and more advanced systems for building the capabilities, as I said, for mining, for production of helium-3 on the moon. But I want to come back to this because I want to show you exactly where we're going to be landing and why this is important. Go to the next one, please. So, in around 2009, first of all, it's been made very clear by NASA and that we didn't really, we went to the moon, we had 6 missions with 12 astronauts landing on the moon and so forth. We found out a little bit, but one thing that we weren't clear on or weren't certain of is the presence of water ice on the moon until about the 2009, when we actually sent a instrument called the LCROSS, and the LCROSS Lunar Crater Observation and Sensing Satellite, and that's this location right here is where the observation satellite landed. And what we were able to finally confirm and make confirmation of was the existence of water ice on the moon. And this was in 2009, around October of 2009 with this system. And so this just unleashed something explosive, very powerful here. In terms of the fact that we're not just talking about you have little lakes under the moon or ability for water ice, but what can you do with this? The idea that now we have the capabilities to have sustainable presence on the moon, that you can actually organize some of the resources on the moon in terms of hydrogen, oxygen capabilities for allowing for sustained presence of our astronauts, or for building, for developing fuel systems on the moon. And also the idea that this area is ripe for a sustainable presence, a permanent presence on the moon. Now, the location very close to where we were able to make that confirmation about the water ice that the U.S. is looking at landing is about right here, in a crater called the Shackleton Crater region.
Which is the South Pole.
It's in and this is in the South Pole of the moon. And it's become a very popular area of the moon because it's not just the United States that's now planning and organizing for landings in this South Pole area. The Chinese are down here in the von Karman crater, about this low. I can't remember. I think it's somewhere around here, where the Indians are also now have just launched the Chandrayaan-2 spacecraft that is going to the moon and is actually scheduled to be on the moon by September 8th of this year. So September 7th. Okay. So I said I was going to land on Lynn's birthday. Yeah. But the importance is this area has a lot of capabilities for, as said, the existence of water ice, the existence of where you would be able to mine resources from the moon, and the key to this is that, as LaRouche was saying in his video, that one of the things that many nations, including China, really, the United States, but we're not emphasizing it as much, that it's not just about developing the water ice on the moon, but developing the capabilities for fuel systems, for propulsion, rocket propulsion systems. And, if you want to be able to get to Mars, then if you actually develop the capabilities for fusion propulsion systems and rocket propulsion systems to get to Mars, you can launch from orbit around the moon using the resources of the moon, and you don't have to actually launch and use all of the heavy lift rockets and so forth that you would have to from Earth. And that's why also the Gateway Orbiter and being able to land and descend into the moon would be so important. But big thing is this area and also throughout the moon is the existence of what's called helium-3, the helium-3 materials on the moon. And helium-3 is going to be the wave of the future for developing the propulsion system and also powering the entirety of the Earth. Because this resource, which more and more people are starting to get a clear understanding, is the wave of the future to not for multi-billionaires to make a profit off of, but the future for ending poverty, advancing mankind, ending this idea of limitations to growth and limitations to resources, because many of the resources that we need exist right on the moon to power us and to propel us throughout the solar system. And let's go to the next one here. No, actually skip that one. Go to guess that one you can't see. So Joel has done a lot of work on this because as far as, I want to go back to, there's not going to be a Mars exploration or sending human beings to Mars unless we get it right on the fact that we have to unleash and advance the power and the progress of fusion propulsion. And that this is extremely important, that we go through this a lot in the package, because as I said before, you know, Mr. LaRouche made clear, if you had a rocket system that was going to take human beings to Mars in the time frame that it took, you know, based on chemical rockets, you'd be lucky if they make it there. And the key thing is that not only do we have at our fingertips the power of fusion and thermonuclear fusion technologies that can be unleashed and advanced. This is where we really have to put up a fight to make clear that the resources that can be unleashed and mined on the moon, as far as that would allow, really bring us to the point where we can actually put an end to poverty. We can put an end to the limitations of resources. We can feed the planet 100 times over. We can not have bad water and people living without water resources and poverty. And we can unleash a science driver commitment to bringing about the access to all of the materials, all of the resources throughout the solar system that's going to advance the next 50 to 100, even 500 years of human progress here on Earth, because that's what we're talking about with all of this. And this just shows you the reactions that are in terms of what thermonuclear fusion reactions. This is a plasma container system here for a fusion reactor, and that just to show, my point in showing this is not to go through the different reactions of fusion. You know, you do have deuterium, tritium, you have helium-3, you know, helium-3 reactions, which are some of the most powerful helium-3 deuterium reactions, most powerful reactions to unleashing, if you think about it, 1 million electron volts of energy. We're talking about massive energy capabilities here. And this, you compare the energy capabilities that you can unleash with the power of the, you know, the power of the sun, of fusion reactions that you can unleash with, why are we having right now having to fight with, you know, the electric company calling us saying we're using up too much energy sources here. I mean, if you had fusion propulsion, thermonuclear fusion systems, you had nuclear power, you had nuclear reactors working at the highest levels from the resource of the moon defined by helium-3, we would never have a power problem. It's not going to, you know, not going to exist. So this is what we need. This is what we need. And you know, you have the fact that you can actually use this power to unleash a total transformation of your society in terms of what would this unleashing of the power of thermonuclear fusion do, not just for allowing us to travel throughout the solar system with advanced rocket systems, but also be able to develop new resources. Because people say, well, we're confined to the limitations of resources on the planet, but the key thing is that some of the things that we recognize as resources today weren't actually resources before until they were actually discovered and unleashed by the development of the human mind to, to make it into resources, whether it's, how you've had oil and petroleum capabilities have been able to be put into different other resources. So my point is that, you think about it, if we mine helium-3 on the moon, if we actually define other resources throughout the moon and advancing onto Mars, what this capability would allow us to do in terms of putting the power of fusion propulsion systems or fusion systems into the development of new materials. That one of the things that you can do with this is you can organize processes called a fusion torch, and we talk about this in the pamphlet, that with this you can take certain materials and break them down into their component resources and develop and make new materials. You can basically put all kinds of materials into a reactor and have it come out as new material resources. So that's now how do we actually define what it's going to take to get people to realize again that the world needs more people to help us to make this cultural transformation. Thank you. That what we really are up against is we are at a moment where we can actually unleash the true spark of human reason. That we can go against this idea of human beings as nothing more than animals. That we are conditioned to live as as the beavers did, only in the way as they're the same as their fathers and grandfathers before. That that the idea that we can advance and expand mankind based on the idea of what the greenies, the eco-fascists, the people who say, they want to go like a thief in the night and destroy chemical plants and destroy electric facilities or industrial facilities and so forth. Because, and as they say, well, that if we actually have a die-off, it'll be a good thing, a die-off of human culture, because at least some people will survive. Those evil people cannot accept and cannot cherish the power that can be unleashed by the human mind to be able to make a breakthrough and free mankind from the grip of cultural, political, economic despair. And what we have to do right now is we have to, again, as I said at the beginning, we're on a mission to go out and to free mankind from cultural despair and to free mankind from the induced pessimism by the anti-human imperial forces, and to unleash in the greatest way optimism. And we invite you to join us in that mission because we're out in the streets every single day. This is a cultural, a spiritual warfare that we're in the middle of. This isn't just a political fight. This is to actually identify the creative presence of every single human being. And the most important thing we have to do right now is we have to free and we have to get our young people the future they deserve away from this evil of the culture that's gripping and taking them in and turning them into zombies and mass killers. And as said, we need you to help us to go out in the streets, get this out. I encourage everybody, grab a friend, get a reading group together, read this pamphlet. Really go and watch and be inspired by the ideas of an economic and cultural transformation, as you just heard from Mr. LaRouche laid out here. And more people need to have access to these ideas. More and more people need to have access to the ideas of Mr. LaRouche, because listening to that, if this is your first time here or your first time listening on this broadcast here, you probably can get a sense of why the enemy the oligarchy sees LaRouche as a threat. Because anybody expressing that quality of mankind and human and economic and cultural progress against the wishes of the oligarchy to destroy mankind is a threat. And that's what they're seeing in terms of the potential and the capabilities coming from the president is right now. And again, as said, the plan to destroy the United States on the lies and the Russiagate collusion had backfired, didn't work. So now what are they going for? We don't want you to know about Project Artemis. We don't want you to know about the excitement and the unleashing of great optimism and what we can be doing for getting our young people a future. We want you to know about the bad guy being a racist. This is the lies that we have to stop right now. And so the way we're going to do that is, as we're seeing in the streets, all different types of people are, the response that they're getting is, they don't want to hear about politics per se. They want to hear about who is providing leadership to guarantee that there is a way out, that there is a future for them, that there is a future for their children. And this is how we're doing it. So take this, spread it, spread optimism, take it to your campuses, take it to your churches, get a discussion going, and come out and join us in the streets. So I want to thank you guys for participating, and if you have any questions or comments, go ahead.
Kesha, you talk about youth and pessimism, right, and the efforts that globalists make, whether you want to call it the UN or UNESCO or whatever. The most major effort that they make is to control our schools, right?
Education.
I was listening to a speech of it's Alex Newman, who works with several organizations, including the JBS, including several other kinds of things. Was in Victoria like a few days ago, and he was talking about what exactly you have to do. I mean, you've got like 85% of our youth are still stuck in these government schools, right? And they're having this stuff drilled into their heads day and night. He said that this is like 5 days a week, like 8 hours a day, and the typical person, the typical family can't fight that, right? What he's going to be spending like maybe a couple of hours at home, school follows him home, the kids home. You have to deal with all this homework, you have to deal with Common Core, which, Common Core math is basically child abuse, right? You've got, maybe an hour, a couple of hours a day in church or Sunday school, maybe an hour a day, when the kid isn't trying to deal with homework, where parents might try to reach him. You're going to lose that right now. The analogy that Alex Newman made, suppose all the kids in your neighborhood were in a building, the building was on fire. The first thing that goes through your head can't be like, oh, gee, how do I save that building and put that fire out, right? That's not, your first thought has to be, how am I going to get all these kids out of that building, and then worry about whether or not you want to save the building. Whether the building's worth saving, but
Yeah,
at
well,
this point, does the LaRouche Group have any sort of a view on education or schooling, or?
yes, this is it. You actually, first of all, have to define a mission, because you can't just have people going to school and they're being taught that, you know, the human beings are bad,
They're being taught greenism.
they're being taught environmental
Sustainability and
eco-fascism
they're
and so forth.
being conditioned, indoctrinated with
Exactly.
information.
No, I mean, the thing you really need to do is get as many of our children out of these government schools as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can. That's got to be the goal.
Ted, you're wrong.
Why?
First of all, this greenism goes back decades. You know, when I was in high school, they were giving us Lord of the Flies and Joseph Conrad and all this stuff. And, you know, there have been a series of step-by-step takedowns which have been pushed through the education curriculum. But then if your response to that is, well, let's get rid of public schools and put everyone in charter and private schools, you know, or homeschooling or something like that. No, Kesha is right. You have to have a national mission that demands science, you know, physics, understanding of the universe, you know, and that has to go through, and the government has to make it happen. And that sounds like, you know, people become cynical about government, you know, then I'm sorry, you get rid of the government, what are you left with? The free market, right, which is run by Wall Street and
Before you had it,
so you have to have, it's our government, you know, we've got to make it work, and it's got to happen around this national mission, and the education policy follows from that.
Before you had coercive education, you know, schooling, you had a literacy rate in the United States that was close to 100%. Okay, that had gone on for decades, right? The American public education system is based on a Prussian model, which the Prussians adopted in 1807 after the Napoleon wiped Canada. And that system was never intended to produce self-reliant people. It was meant to produce cannon fodder and bricks in the wall. And this is before you even get to Common Core, leftist indoctrination, or greenism, or anything like that.
Let's let some other questions get in. Ask here.
Go ahead.
Comments.
Something that wasn't mentioned, well, it may be self-evident to a lot of people, but a vigorous program of manned space exploration will also provide an effective defense of the planet against impacts such as the one which caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. There is no negotiation with these things. They have to be identified and they have to be neutralized. And the only way we can do that is by being able to become an effective spacefaring civilization. So I just wanted to bring that up, although to a lot of thinking people, it'll go without saying.
And I want to thank you, because I do want to respond to that, because I think what you just said is absolutely important, because what we're talking about here is how do you actually bring the whole of mankind together around a common commitment and common mission. And now that is the basis, as in this report, we also defined prior to the report a petition on the Moon-Mars mission. And the most important aspect of that is the international cooperation that is saving, defining the common mission required for saving the human species. That, as you said, you know, how is it that we're going to bring the leading nations of the world, Russia, China, India, not just around a mission of exploring the moon and exploring space, but that we actually have to unleash an economic commitment to the advancement of all of mankind. And that is what the space program represents, because, yeah, we keep hearing that on a regular basis how closely one of these extinction events are coming with the near-Earth objects and the asteroids and so forth. Are we prepared for that as a civilization? Will we work together? You know, it's not going to go and say, I'm going to hit Russia and the United States, oh well, or hit the
Wherever
United
it hits,
States.
it's going to take us out faster than global warming.
It's good, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So no, that's a very important point. Ron, you had something.
Yeah, I was just reminded you, you mentioned the Club of Life. And if people remember, or they can look it up, we had a beautiful pamphlet that had this picture of, 10, 20 young people on it. And really beaming color picture, and really attractive. And I had gone back a number of years later and was looking at this, and I just happened to notice a caption on the picture that if you look at the date on the picture, the time I was re-looking at this pamphlet, all those kids were 47 or so, as an average. And so there's a time lag in these things that, you know, where people just have to get real about it. One of the funniest things I remember from Croft Erica when he gave the conference in '84, maybe it was '83 or so, it was right about the time that the one of the Voyagers was dancing through the rings of Saturn, and he was making the point from the stage how out here you've got this kind of phenomena, you've got these electronic beams are being sent back. It takes like 32 or I forget how many seconds to get to the Earth, and then it hits the human mind and human cranium, and it takes about 6 months to get through. You know, so there's a time factor in this that people can get also abstracted on, that it's really a fight, and we don't get another chance. And so we have these things that have to be rigorously addressed, but you know, we've got all kinds of histories in Humboldt plans of education, whatever. You look at what LaRouche has done with a couple of generations of youth in this organization and what we've impacted in the world. The question is not, can we fix the education system? The question is whether we'll find in ourselves the passion to get out and make sure it gets delivered at this point, because we're out of time. We now have to do it. And that's what Kesha was talking about a little earlier. There's a quality, and Lynn's always stressed this, there's ideas, and then the only way those ideas become real is you have a passion to deliver them. And that's on the subject today. I mean, there's a wealth. You can go to the films of LaRouche, everything. The tools to do this are there. The tools are there. You can walk out and you can actually pull anybody together, and you get all the backup to pull off a meeting and actually get people involved. The question is, do we have the courage and passion to deliver it? And that's the subject that's involved in these committees of correspondence and getting people on the Thursday night calls, you know, sign ourselves up to the EIR and actually take personal responsibility that now this is going to work. And then we'll solve everything else.
Well, just as a sort of something that underlines what Ron is saying, is that on this question of education, I think that, you know, since the turn of the last century, you know, from the 19th into the 20th century, there was a continuous effort to basically destroy education with, you know, Aldous Huxley out there. You had John Dewey, and that whole crew. They've been working at it. But the thing that they always forget, and Bertrand Russell, of course, he was in there, is that all of these kids are human beings. And within them is an innate character that loves mankind. And they want to love mankind. And the only way they can do that is through the creative use of their mind. So when they run into what we're saying on a campus or anywhere else, is that if we're talking to them about what is possible from the standpoint of science, not from the standpoint of cultural parameters, but what's possible, then they get excited. And despite all of the brainwashing that's been done, what we're doing is we're opening a door into a world they didn't think existed or didn't know existed. So the question of education really is what Ron is saying. Is if we're going to say what has to be done, if we're going to make sure that message is getting out, the population is fertile ground.
I mean, I'll just say myself, even despite all the brainwashing, I mean, I remember Mrs. Starr, right? I mean, she was my 8th grade chemistry teacher, right? And we probably each had a teacher or two back there that was just really turned on by ideas, you know, and imparted that to us, right? I also remember my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Coleman, right? She had there was a little series, Miss Pickerel goes to the moon, Miss Pickerel to the bottom of the sea, Miss Pickerel, you know, to Mars, right? You know, reading us these stories about this old lady, you know, that ends up, you know, on all these scientific adventures, right?
She was probably younger than you at the time.
And what happened was that was the teacher that got a knock on the door that day, November 22nd, 1963, you know, and was called out to the hallway. and came back with tears in her eyes, and she didn't have the courage to tell us that Kennedy had been shot. You know, she waited until we found out other ways. You know,
Wow.
but there was that. You know, if you have someone that's really turned on by science and ideas, you know, and can impart that to other people, but it does really require, you know, and it's the toughest nut. You know, I mean, Trump tried to grab at it when he talks about the new culture. How do you do it? That's a big freaking challenge, you know. But as Mark said with the asteroids, you know, you don't have a choice. We have to develop a science culture again quickly, you know, or we're doomed. And that includes music and, you know, and things like that. But you know, the government has to have, you know, we have to force the government to move in that direction. That's a big challenge, but we have to do it.
Plus, we have the example of the Apollo project. And people forget that NASA was a government agency.
Still is.
And it got to the moon. And if you look at the documentaries on the Mission Control Center, most of those people manning the controls were average, I think it was 26. And most of those people went to public school. So it's not a matter of the formal schools. Do you have a mission? Because if you're learning all this physics to come up with a better trading strategy for Merrill Lynch or Goldman Sachs, that's evil. But if you're figuring out how to get to the moon with a trajectory that's never been done before, then you're using the same tools, but for a useful purpose, not just to make money.
That's right. So, with that, you know, what I also, again, I'm going to stress for people to do is to, one, help us get this pamphlet out. That is, contribute, take several of them with you, get it out, as I said, to your friends, your family, you know, neighbors, church members. If you work with young people, get the young people to see this. And we need the resources to continue to be able to wage this fight out on the streets. It was very important for our organization, you know, because our ideas are more powerful than the hordes of money that we have, because we don't have the hordes of money. But we do have this most powerful ideas that's transforming the planet, transforming people in the greatest way. I mean, when we went to the line with, you know, thousands of people at the Trump rally, and we had our big signs about the Project Artemis and the future of the space mission, and, you know, LaRouche's life dedication to this. And one thing is that there was a lot of recognition of Lyndon LaRouche and his movement, which the enemy doesn't want you to have. He wants to say this guy has been, they wanted to try to make him long dead, even though he just recently passed away just for a little over 4 months ago.
6 months.
But 6 months now, yeah, in February 12th. But the ideas of LaRouche are more powerful, and he is more alive, and our mission is more defined now than ever before. So this isn't just a nice package here, nice pamphlet, you know, for you to go out and read. And this is how we're going to change the culture. This is how we're going to change lives. This is how we're going to inspire people. So make a contribution. I'm talking to those in the room. I'm talking to those who will hear this. I'm talking to people on Facebook. I'm talking to everybody. Get involved in this fight. Get this out, and contribute to our fight to inspire and bring about a bold new unleashing of the greatest mission that mankind has seen. So that's what I wanted to say. I want to thank you guys for being here today. And you had one more thing you wanted
Well, it's just that everyone knows it's August in Houston here, hot Houston.
Yes.
But one place where it's kind of cool in August is the tunnels, the pedestrian tunnels under downtown. And we're thinking of doing a distribution this week. Did we decide that that was going to be Monday, Kesha?
No. Oh, we did. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So it would be about lunchtime on Monday with a leaflet. It's quick. People are in a hurry, but you know, it's something that if you want to kind of jump in for the first time and
Yeah, it's a good idea.
you know, is to join us.
We'll be out there about 11:30. Meet over there.
Well, maybe we could meet here. Go together. What do you think? Or
Yeah.
I suppose
Yeah.
we could meet there, but I mean, it's kind of hard to find each other, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. And why don't we say that we'll meet at the office, and people can let us know if you're interested in joining here in the room at 11 o'clock. We're going to go to the downtown Houston tunnels.
earlier than that if we're going to be there for the rush hour.
Right, but let's not do it on the. So
We'll talk about it.
yeah, we'll set it up here in a little bit. So again, we got a lot of work to do, and I think that everybody in this room is committed to taking up the challenge. I hope you are. So, all right, thank you guys. Thank you.
So let me just mention, on the front table, there's an article that was written by Kesha and Brian